Back then, the skies over Europe were ours, or so we believed. The hum of the engines, the chatter in the radio, the comforting drone of propellers, those were the sounds of confidence. By 1944, we ruled the daylight. Our flying fortresses and liberators filled the horizon like flocks of iron geese, raining destruction upon the heart of Hitler's war machine. We thought we'd seen it all. Flak, Focke-Wulfs, Messerschmitts diving from the sun. But one day, somewhere high above Germany, something broke every rule we knew about flying and fighting. Imagine this. You're in the cockpit of your B-17, 30,000 feet up, contrails cutting through the cold blue, your crew steady and calm. Then, without warning, a flash. No propeller, no sound, just a streak of fire that slices past your formation faster than you can blink. A blur that shouldn't exist. The radio explodes with panic. What the hell was that? And before anyone can answer, it's gone. Just gone. That was the first time American airmen saw the future, wrapped in flame and desperation. Germany's rocket-powered interceptor, the Messerschmitt Me-163 Komet. At first, no one believed it. The reports were dismissed as optical illusions, or maybe experimental jets. But deep inside the collapsing Reich, engineers were gambling everything on speed. Pure, blistering, terrifying speed. The Me-163 wasn't a plane, it was a rocket with wings. Its heart was the Volter HWK-509A engine, fed by two volatile fuels, T-stuff and C-stuff, that could dissolve human flesh if mixed incorrectly. The men who flew it called it a devil's chariot. The engineers called it a miracle. But to us, up there in the bombers, it was something else entirely. It was a ghost of the future, streaking through the clouds with a fiery tail, rewriting everything we thought we knew about the sky. The first confirmed encounter came in May 1944. Captain John Murphy of the 487th Bomb Group was leading a formation toward Leipzig when his tail gunner screamed, "Fast mover, 2 o'clock low." Before they could even aim, the thing, whatever it was, had torn through the formation and vanished. No propeller, Murphy wrote later in his diary, just flame and speed like I've never seen. At the debriefing, intelligence officers dismissed it. Probably a jet, they said, maybe a 262 prototype. But those who saw it knew better. There was no time to track it, no warning. It was there, and then it wasn't. Some gunners swore they saw the pilot's helmet for a split second before he disappeared into the sun. And every man who saw it returned to base shaken, whispering the same thing. The sky just got faster. The truth, hidden behind the Iron Cross, was even stranger. The MiG-163 could reach speeds over 950 kilometers per hour, nearly twice as fast as the P-51 Mustang. It could climb to 30,000 feet in under 3 minutes. Nothing else on Earth could do that in 1944. The Komet would take off from a simple trolley, powered by a rocket engine that burned for only 7.5 minutes. After that, the pilot was a glider, unpowered, vulnerable, and alone. But during that brief, furious climb, the Komet could outrun every bullet, every interceptor, every thought of resistance. Allied crews didn't know how to fight it. You couldn't turn with it, couldn't chase it. By the time your gun sights found it, it had already shot past and vanished. For the men inside those bombers, it was like watching the laws of physics unravel. One moment the sky was calm, the next it was ripped open by fire. We used to joke that the Germans had run out of metal, that soon they'd throw rocks at us. But what they threw instead was the future, a glimpse of what was coming after the war, a weapon so fast it scared even its creators. The Komet pilots were few, and their missions often suicidal. But when that rocket lit, when the craft screamed into the heavens, even Allied radar operators couldn't believe their screens. It was the dawn of something terrifying and magnificent, a machine that turned the sky into a battlefield of speed and flame. And for the first time, the mighty U.S. Air Force realized the enemy still had cards left to play. By 1944, Germany's cities were burning. Every dawn brought the distant thunder of American bombers, wave after wave blotting out the sun. The Luftwaffe, once masters of the air, were now ghosts, scattered, exhausted, flying machines built from scraps. The mighty Bf-109 and Fw-190 were still lethal, but no longer enough. Against the endless Allied formations, even courage had its limits. Inside Hitler's collapsing empire, desperation had turned into obsession. At Peenemünde, the same place where V-2 rockets clawed toward the edge of space, another dream was taking shape. A fighter that could climb faster than fear itself. Engineers called it Project X. Pilots would soon call it suicide. This was the birth of the Me-163 Komet, a machine so radical it seemed torn from science fiction. Designed by Dr. Alexander Lippisch, the aircraft was unlike anything that had flown before. No tail, no propeller, just swept wings and a rocket engine that burned liquid fire. It didn't hum or roar, it screamed like a banshee in the clouds. And the men building it knew one mistake could erase them from existence. Deep beneath hangars, in workshops lit by flickering lamps, engineers mixed two fuels that hated each other, T stuff and C stuff, one oxidizer, one hydrazine mixture. If they ever touched, even by accident, they would ignite spontaneously, leaving nothing but a crater and a whisper. Mechanics worked in rubber suits, faces hidden behind glass shields. Some didn't survive the testing phase. Yet every disaster only hardened their resolve. If we cannot win with numbers, then we will win with speed. The Komet became Germany's final gamble. A craft so fast it could destroy bombers before they even realized they were under attack.
But what looked glorious on paper was a nightmare in practice. The rocket engine was a marvel, yes, but also a monster. It could lift the Komet to 30,000 feet in 180 seconds. But once the fuel burned out, the aircraft was nothing more than a glider. Unarmed, exposed, and drifting through enemy skies. Pilots had about 7 minutes of power. 7 minutes to climb, strike, and survive. Only a handful of men were chosen to fly this beast. They called themselves the Rocket Knights, and among them was a man named Wolfgang Speth, a veteran test pilot with nerves of steel and eyes that never blinked. When Speth first ignited the Komet, witnesses said the aircraft vanished almost instantly. 1 second on the runway, the next a flaming streak across the horizon.
He landed minutes later, shaken but alive. It's like riding a cannon shell, he told engineers. It's the future, but it's also death. That future terrified even the Luftwaffe brass. The Komet was too dangerous to mass produce, too volatile to train on. But Hitler's obsession with miracle weapons pushed it into service anyway. The propaganda machine called it the new guardian of the Reich, showing paintings of comets diving heroically through bomber formations. In truth, only a handful were ever fully operational, and of those, most were destroyed before they even took off. But when they did fly, the effect was seismic. Allied pilots couldn't believe what they saw. A tiny dart-shaped aircraft that climbed vertically, faster than any piston engine could hope to follow. The Me-163 could approach bomber formations at nearly 600 miles per hour, fire its 30mm cannons, and vanish in seconds. It looked like it was falling upward, one American gunner said. You'd see a trail of white flame, then boom, it was gone. Yet this miracle weapon came at a terrible price. The fuels ate through metal, through skin, through sanity. Many Komet pilots never made it past their first takeoff. The launch trolley sometimes jammed, flipping the aircraft and killing the pilot instantly. Others burned alive when fuel tanks ruptured. Those who survived the climb faced the deadliest part, the landing. Without landing gear or power, Komets had to glide home and touch down on a skid, hoping no Allied fighter was waiting to finish them off. One misjudged approach, one gust of wind, and the craft would explode on impact. The sky had gotten faster, yes, but it had also gotten crueler. Inside the Luftwaffe's underground hangars, Speth and his fellow pilots prepared each mission, knowing the odds were hopeless, but they flew anyway. They believed, even in defeat, that they were guardians of the future. "We are testing what the world will one day master," Speth said before one flight. "We may not live to see it, but others will." His words, spoken in 1944, would prove hauntingly true.
For across the channel, Allied intelligence had begun to piece together fragments of reports, sightings of ghost planes, debris from rocket-powered prototypes, fragments of burned fuel tanks. Still, no one truly believed until the day American pilots saw the comet with their own eyes, rising from the ground like a firework of vengeance. For the first time in the war, it wasn't man versus man in the sky. It was man versus the future.
The first time we saw one, it didn't feel real. We were flying out of England, crossing the North Sea into enemy country. Another day, another mission. The sky was clear, the formation tight. Radios crackled, bomb bay doors checked, escorts in sight. It was routine, the kind of deadly routine you get used to in war. Then, somewhere near Kassel, everything changed. One of the waist gunners on a B-17 called out, "Fast mover, coming in hot!" But no one saw it, not at first, just a shimmer, a blur against the sun, and then fire. A line of fire cutting through the blue, moving faster than the mind could follow. The thing came in from below, vertical, like it had been shot out of hell itself. In less than a second, it passed through the formation. No engine sound, no propeller, just a flash of silver and a roaring contrail. The tail gunner screamed, "It's a rocket! It's a damned rocket!" Before the crew could even react, a burst of 30mm shells tore through the lead bomber. One moment it was there, the next it was falling, wings sheared clean off. In the chaos, every man on the radio was shouting over each other, "What was that? No plane's that fast! It's not human!" But the truth was simple. The Germans had built something beyond us, something that didn't fly like a plane, but leapt like lightning. The May 163 Komet had entered the war, and every man who saw it knew instantly the age of propellers was dying. Reports began flooding in. Pilots described ghost ships, flaming arrows, machines faster than bullets. Command didn't believe half of it. Intelligence officers shrugged it off, saying maybe the Germans were experimenting with jets, perhaps the new May 262. But those who had been up there knew better. The comet didn't sound like a jet. It didn't move like one. It had a kind of savage purity, a burst of energy that tore through the sky and disappeared into silence. It felt like the future had arrived, and we were just relics in its path. The bomber crews tried to adapt, but how do you fight something you can't even chase? The comet's attack window was measured in seconds. It would climb from the ground at over 30,000 feet per minute, reach the bomber stream, make 1 or 2 firing passes, and then glide home, out of fuel, but still deadly. In those 7 minutes of powered flight, it was untouchable. Its speed made conventional dogfighting impossible. By the time a gunner got a bead on it, the Komet was already gone, its vapor trail fading like smoke after a lightning strike. At briefing rooms across England, disbelief turned to fear, then strategy. American pilots began sketching out theories on chalkboards, how to anticipate, how to survive. "You can't outrun it," one instructor said. "You can only outthink it." But even thinking was hard when you saw one up close. A few months later, near Mersburg, a formation of B-24s encountered another Komet attack. One of the escorts, Captain Robert "Buck" Davis of the 357th Fighter Group, dove to intercept. He caught sight of the German rocket plane just as it fired its cannons, twin flashes of light ripping through the bombers. Davis rolled over, dropped altitude, and tried to line up a shot. "It was like trying to shoot at lightning," he later said. "You see it, you blink, and it's gone." The Komet blasted upward, pulling 9 Gs, disappearing into the clouds. Davis never saw it again. But that day, he realized something terrifying. The Germans had leapt a generation ahead in technology. And yet, for all its power, the Komet was fragile. After just 7 minutes of flight, the engine would sputter and die, leaving the pilot to glide home over enemy territory. It was then, during that silent descent, that the Allies found their only chance. A few lucky P-51 pilots learned to wait. They'd climb above the bomber formations and watch. When the Komet's fiery trail burned out, when it began gliding helplessly toward its base, they struck. Lieutenant John "Red" Callahan of the 352nd Fighter Group was among the first to down one. It was like hunting a meteor after it burned out. I saw it diving back to Earth, silent, graceful, and I just squeezed the trigger. The Komet exploded on impact, scattering wreckage across the fields of Luna. For the first time, the invincible had been brought down. But victory felt hollow. Callahan later stood by the crater, staring at the twisted metal. He said, "I realized the man inside that thing never had a chance. He wasn't fighting for glory. He was fighting for survival." As weeks passed, more encounters followed. Each one blurred the line between fear and fascination. Some American crews began calling the Komet the Firebird. Others nicknamed it Satan's Dart. Every time one appeared, men whispered prayers over their intercoms. "Keep it steady, boys. It's just a plane. It's just a plane." But deep down, they knew it wasn't just a plane. It was a glimpse of a world that had arrived too early, a weapon so advanced it barely belonged to the same war. After each mission, debriefing officers pieced together fragments of gun camera footage and pilot testimony, trying to understand how to fight it. But the answer was always the same. You can't. You wait for it to burn out. You wait for its speed to betray it. And still, that thought lingered in every pilot's mind. If they have this now, what will they have next? That question haunted the skies of 1944.
The Me-163 didn't change the outcome of the war, but it changed something deeper, the way we thought about war itself. The sky was no longer a place of honor and dogfights. It was a proving ground for the future, a place where man's reach had finally touched the edge of the impossible.
By late 1944, the shock had worn off, but the fear hadn't. Every time a formation crossed into German skies, there lingered that unspoken dread. Would this be the day one of those rocket birds showed up again? The Allies had learned enough by then to know the Komet wasn't invincible, but no less terrifying. Intelligence briefings spread across bomber groups like wildfire. Charts showed the Komet's performance curve, its limited endurance, its suicidal landing routine. Wait for it to glide, commanders told their men. That's when it's weakest. But in practice, that was easier said than done. Finding a comet after it ran dry was like chasing a shadow. You had to predict where it would fall, wait for it to descend, and hope you could get there first. Even so, the Allies adapted. P-51 Mustangs began patrolling near known rocket bases, circling at altitude like hawks. Ground reconnaissance identified strange circular runways and short rails, the launch sites of Germany's miracle fighters. Pilots were briefed to strike these airfields before the comets could even take off. Yet the Germans fought back with cunning and courage, moving their rocket planes through forests, camouflaging them in barns, refueling them under night skies lit only by the glow of their own destruction. The Luftwaffe's first rocket interceptor wing, Jagdgeschwadron 400, was stationed at Brandis and later Husum, squadrons of young men with old souls. Many were barely 20, veterans of nothing but hope and fear. They trained for months in gliders, memorizing the 7-minute ballet of death that was a Komet mission. Take off on a trolley, burn for 7 minutes, fire once or twice, glide home, land on a skid, survive if fate was kind. Most of the time, it wasn't. The fuel, a mixture of hydrogen peroxide and hydrazine, was so volatile that mechanics joked you could kill a man just by thinking about it wrong. The reality was worse. One drop spilled during refueling could ignite an explosion large enough to erase a hangar. Many ground crews were lost without ever seeing combat. Yet, despite the risks, despite the futility, these young pilots climbed into their steel coffins day after day. "We knew it wouldn't change the war," said one Komet pilot years later, "but it was our duty to try." On the other side, Allied scientists were racing to understand the threat. Wreckage from downed comets was collected, studied, and dissected. American engineers at Farnborough examined the strange swept-wing design, marveling at its elegance and insanity. It was ahead of its time, but born in the wrong moment. They learned that the rocket burned through its fuel so quickly that after a few minutes the comet was nothing more than a glider, beautiful, deadly, and defenseless. The key was patience. Wait for the burn. Wait for the silence. Strike when the fire died. Slowly, Allied tactics evolved. Fighter escorts began to stay with bomber formations longer, protecting them during the comet's attack window. Radar operators were trained to spot the short, steep climbs that signaled a launch. Once the comet reached its apex and began its powerless descent, P-51s moved in for the kill. It was a cruel game of timing and endurance, but in war, logic always finds a way to survive. Even so, every encounter left scars, on the mind and on the conscience. Many Allied pilots admitted a strange respect for the men inside those rocket interceptors. They weren't faceless enemies anymore. They were souls strapped to fire, fighting a war they knew was already lost. One Komet pilot, Lieutenant Rolf Glogner, described the moment before takeoff. You hear nothing, you feel nothing. Then suddenly the rocket ignites and the world disappears. You aren't flying the plane, you're being thrown through the sky. He knew each flight could be his last, yet he climbed in anyway, because that's what pilots do. They fly, no matter the odds. When he landed one afternoon in September 1944, his Comet's landing skid failed. The aircraft flipped, the fuel tanks ruptured, and the explosion tore half the airfield apart. Nothing was left. His comrades stood in silence. No medals, no speeches, just the smell of burned metal and the knowledge that they were fighting time itself. For the Allies, the Comet became a symbol, not of fear, but of transition. It proved that the age of piston engines was ending, that the next war, if there was one, would be fought by machines that burned the sky itself. Allied pilots returned home after missions, haunted not by flak or fighters, but by the sight of that impossible speed. The streak of white that whispered, "This is only the beginning." By the winter of 1945, the Comets were fewer. Fuel was gone. Bases were bombed. Germany itself was crumbling. But those who had seen them knew they'd witnessed something unforgettable. A weapon so far ahead of its time that it made the war itself feel primitive. And somewhere in the ruins of Brandis, a burned hangar still smelled faintly of tea-stoff, and the ghosts of the rocket pilots lingered, waiting for a sky that no longer belonged to them. When the war finally ended, The skies over Europe grew quiet again. The contrails faded. The bombers returned home, and those strange fire-breathing machines, the Me-163 Komets, lay scattered across the ruins of airfields that no longer existed. Their burned remains rested under the ashes of a fallen empire, wings torn, canopy shattered, their engines silent forever. To the victors, they were trophies. To history, they were prophecies. The Allied teams who entered Germany in 1945 found these machines hidden in barns, buried under camouflage nets, half-finished in underground tunnels. Many still smelled of rocket fuel. Some had crashed only days earlier. When American engineers first examined them up close, they were stunned. The Me-163 looked more like a spacecraft than a fighter plane. Its swept wings, pressurized cockpit, and rocket motor were decades ahead of their time. But behind that genius lay madness. Fuels that could melt flesh, engines that killed their own pilots, and a design so unforgiving that it claimed more German lives than Allied ones. The engineers realized what the pilots already knew. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a glimpse of humanity's obsession with going faster, higher, and further, no matter the cost. At captured Luftwaffe bases, American officers interviewed the survivors of Jagdgeschwader 400, the rocket interceptor wing. Only a handful were left. Their uniforms were scorched, their eyes hollow, their hands trembling from chemical burns that would never heal. One of them, a quiet young man barely 22, said something that would stay with the interrogators forever. "We weren't fighting you," he whispered. "We were fighting time." And in that sentence lay the truth of the Komet. It was not built to win the war. It was built to prove that even in defeat, the human mind refuses to stop reaching. When Allied scientists shipped the captured Komets back to Britain and the United States, they became blueprints for the future. The British learned from its wing design. The Americans studied its rocket engine. Even the Soviets dismantled one and rebuilt it in secret. Within a few short years, its DNA was everywhere. In the X-planes that broke the sound barrier, in the early jets that tore through the stratosphere, in the rockets that would one day leave Earth entirely. The Me-163 was a dead end as a weapon, but as an idea, it was eternal. The irony was cruel. The same technology that burned German pilots alive would soon carry astronauts safely into orbit. The same principles that powered a suicide craft would one day fuel exploration, not destruction. It was as if the comet had sacrificed itself so that humanity could learn how to fly into the stars. Men like Chuck Yeager, who broke the sound barrier in 1947, were flying in the shadows of those same German engineers, taking the lessons of speed, lift, and aerodynamics learned in blood, and turning them into the foundations of a new age. Every supersonic jet, every rocket that pierced the upper atmosphere owed something to that strange, lethal craft that once haunted the skies of 1944. Yet, behind the science, there was always the human story. The men on both sides who looked up and saw not an enemy, but the dawn of something far greater. The American pilots who had once cursed the Firebirds later admitted their respect for the German airmen who flew them. They were brave, one veteran said decades later. Crazy, maybe, but brave. And the surviving Komet pilots, now old and frail, confessed that they never felt pride, only sorrow. They had touched the edge of the impossible, and it had nearly consumed them. It was beautiful, one said softly, and it was hell. The Me-163 Komet never changed the outcome of World War II, but it changed the way humanity looked at the sky. It showed that progress and peril often share the same wings, that invention born in desperation can still light the path forward. For a few short months, in a world torn apart by war, men rode rockets into the heavens, not to conquer, but to survive. And in doing so, they unlocked the door to the future. The story of the Komet is not just a story about technology or war, it's a story about us, about how far we'll go to touch the unknown, even when the price is everything. Today, a few of those comets still exist, silent in museums, their paint faded, their edges dulled by time. Tourists walk past, children stare, historians take notes. But if you listen closely, really listen, you can almost hear it. The whisper of hydrogen peroxide, the spark of ignition, the scream of fire cutting through the sky. For 7 minutes, it defied gravity. For 7 minutes, it was the fastest thing on Earth. And for 7 minutes, it carried the dreams and madness of an entire generation. The war ended, the rockets fell silent, but that sound, the roar of the Me-163, never truly faded. It became the echo of every dreamer who ever looked up and wondered what lies beyond the clouds. And that was the untold story of Germany's rocket-powered interceptor, the Me-163 Komet, a weapon born of desperation, but destined to inspire the jet age. If you enjoyed this story and want more untold chapters from the skies of World War II, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with someone who loves history as much as you do. Every story I tell keeps the past alive, and together we'll keep discovering the forgotten legends that shaped our world. Until next time, keep your eyes on the sky and your heart in the story.